we haven't met before, my name's Trevor. I'm one of the pastors here at the church, and I'm glad to welcome you back to our First and 10 series. It's a series that we've been doing on the 10 Commandments, and we've given it kind of a football twist to it, and it's been a lot of fun because football's fun. I loved playing football when I was a little kid. It was my favorite sport to play. I was pretty, active in different sports. I played a lot of different ones, but football was by far my favorite. I started playing when I was 7, and I loved it because I not only was allowed to, but I was encouraged to use every ounce of my 48-pound self to hit other boys my age. It was encouraged to just lay them out whenever I could. So this was fun, and I really enjoyed it. I was pretty athletic when I was a kid, so I was pretty decent. That was, of course, until the puberty fairy came to town and started doling out growth spurts to all the other boys. It's like, doot, 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 doot. Apparently, she ran out of inches when she got to me. It's a little embarrassing. I'm 28. I can grow a beard, but I still need my wife to reach stuff off the top shelf. But I remember I was 11 years old, and I was playing in this game, and my coaches were pretty good. They understood it's peewee football. It's about the kids, and it's not about winning or losing. It's about making sure everybody has a good time, and they knew that nobody has a good time when you lose, so win. That was their philosophy, and they drilled us pretty hard, and we were pretty good year after year. And this particular year, again, we were in the championship, and I remember this game. It was in the middle of November, and it was just a war zone. There's snow coming down, it's cold, it's slushy, it's muddy, we're sliding all over the place, we can't see anything, and we are just battling it out for this title, which didn't mean anything, but nobody told us that. And it was just an all-out brawl. And I remember late in the game, the other team had the ball, and I was playing linebacker, which worked at the time. And they snapped the ball, and they run a reverse play, which means that they pretended like they were going to run the ball in one direction, and you kind of just surreptitiously handed it off to a guy running in the other direction. So they run this reverse play, and it works. My whole team falls for it. And so they're all going after the fake. But not me. I caught the guy. I saw him. And I'm so excited in this moment because he thinks he's free and clear. And I see it all playing out in slow motion. I'm running around the end. I'm so excited. I'm going to not only get to lay this guy out, but I'm going to get to save the day, and it's going to be amazing. And that's exactly what was supposed to happen. Instead, what happened is I found myself flying face first into the mud because a guy came up from behind me and decided to shove me in the back, and I go face forward into the mud. And because the rest of my team was chasing an imaginary ball, he ends up scoring a touchdown. And so I'm down, I'm disappointed, but I'm still hopeful because you're not allowed to block somebody in the back. It's clipping and blocking in the back. It's dangerous. It's against the rules. So as I'm getting up, I'm just, expecting that they're just going to throw the little flag and redeem me from this mud hole. And I get up, and I'm like, surely they're going to throw a flag. I mean, surely they had to see it. I was standing right in front of the guy with the ball when it happened. How could they miss it? What were they possibly looking at? Surely nothing. Nothing. I just see them in the end with their arms up, and I'm like, My coaches watch this whole thing go down, and they're screaming their heads off, and now I'm pleading with the ref. I'm like, what? And he's like, I didn't see anything. So I plead harder, which always works with the refs. I don't know if you know this. If you just plead your case harder, then they change their mind. Of course, that didn't happen. The touchdown was not revoked. The day was not saved, and I was crushed. If you've ever played any sports, or if you even just watch sports, you follow a team, you've probably been the victim of a bad call at some point in time, and you've felt this feeling, and it's an awful feeling. It's some, I don't know, I can't even really pinpoint. It's some combination of rage and helplessness and frustration, all mixed together with a healthy dose of wanting to run to mommy. It's a terrible feeling, and even if you haven't played sports or follow sports or anything like that, you've probably experienced this feeling before. Maybe for you, you were literally robbed, like somebody committed an old-fashioned B&E on your house, and they broke in and stole some of your belongings. Or maybe for you, somebody was stolen from you. Like maybe you were interested in a certain special someone. You're just kind of playing it cool, playing it slow, and then one of your friends swoops in and steals them right out from underneath you. You're like, hey, that's mine. Or maybe your spouse seems so preoccupied with the kids or with work or with their hobbies that you're like, I'm pretty sure I got married, but I don't know anymore. You just feel like your spouse has been stolen from you. Or maybe you lost your job all of a sudden and it was out of nowhere and you feel like it was ripped out of your hands. No matter what it is, each of us has had this feeling where something that is ours, rightfully ours, is just taken away from us. And it's a terrible feeling. And since we've all felt it, we can understand why stealing makes it to the top 10 list of God's no-nos. Each week here in our First and 10 series, we've been looking at a different commandment, and this is week 8. So we're looking at the 8th commandment, which, as you can probably figure out by now, is you shall not steal. 4 words, very simple, straightforward. Don't steal. And if this was our first week of First and 10, you'd say, well, it's probably good, we can go. But if you've been here, you've noticed by now that each one of these commands has more than meets the eye, especially if you've been here the last couple weeks. 2 weeks ago, Robert talked about murder. Last week, he talked about adultery. And with each of these commands, they seem like simple one-liners, but we've come to learn that there's a heart, a mindset behind each of these commands that is equally dangerous. And we learned that behind murder is anger, and behind adultery is lust. And Jesus himself, he says that it's not enough to just not kill your neighbor or sleep with his wife. Even if you harbor anger against your neighbor or you think lustfully about his wife, it's as bad as committing these crimes. And so today, as we think about and kind of reflect on this command about stealing, we have to ask ourselves this question: what is the heart of a thief? What's behind that? How do we kind of get to the root and disrupt that in our lives? There's this guy, his name was Innocent, true story, and Innocent was a very smart, business-savvy man, and his cleverness and resourcefulness acquired him a great amount of wealth over the years, but he kind of did it by taking advantage of his own countrymen. He was an Israelite, a Hebrew, but he decided to go to work for Rome as a tax collector, collecting taxes from his own people and sending them back to Rome. So he didn't really make a lot of friends doing this. And to make it worse, he found kind of like a loophole in the system, a way that he could kind of take advantage of it even more by padding the numbers a little bit, taking a little more home for himself. So it's as if you were working as a toll booth collector at like the Midtown Tunnel, and what are they charging to get into the Manhattan these days? It's like $100, right? So at your toll booth, you decide that you're not going to charge $100, you're going to charge $101, and in the end, you send the MTA their portion, and you get to take a little home on the side. And not only was this commonly practiced, but it seemed to be legal at the time for these tax collectors to do this. So our guy managed to really build up quite a nice life for himself, even though people hated him. But as he jumped into his Mercedes chariot and rode back to his McMansion with his 2-horse garage and his in-ground pool overlooking the Jordan, he just kind of got over what other people thought of him. And then one day, he finds out that Jesus is coming to town, and he decides he wants to see what the fuss is about this guy. He doesn't want to follow Jesus or anything. He just wants to be in the know. He's a smart guy. So he goes into town, and it's mobbed, kind of picture Thanksgiving Macy's parade sort of situation. And like me, the puberty fairy wasn't terribly kind to him, so he's a shorter guy, and he can't see anything. But he's smart, so he's like, what? I'm just going to find out the route Jesus is taking. I'll go on ahead, secure a place there. And so he goes on ahead, and he's like, as soon as people come, they're going to push me out of the way. And he sees a sycamore tree, which is perfect because they're have these long, like sprawling branches that start pretty low to the ground. So he's, nobody else is around, and so he can just kind of like, and he, pulls himself up, climbs out on one of the branches, and just takes a seat. And he sits back and waits, and the crowd starts to come around, and he just admires his cleverness once again. that he is the best seat in the house as Jesus is coming. And then Jesus comes and he sees him, and I don't know if it was from divine knowledge or if he just kind of heard the crowd murmuring about him, but he calls him out by name. He comes up to him and he says, "Zacchaeus, come down from that tree." And Zacchaeus is the Greek form of the Hebrew word for innocent, clean. That was his name. He calls him, says, "Come out of the tree. I need to stay with you today." And Zacchaeus is just loving this. He's looking down on all these haters that have been judging him this whole time, and now this is like validation for him. Look, you've been giving me all the, this hard time, but I'm just doing I just kind of outsmarted you. My hands are clean. I'm innocent. Of course, that's not what happens. Instead of Jesus bolstering his reputation, he actually brings Jesus down, which, how bad does your reputation need to be that if Jesus comes to your house, people aren't thinking better of you, they're actually thinking worse of Jesus. That's the situation this guy finds himself in. If you have a Bible, if you want to open up to Luke chapter 19, verse 8, that's page 852 in those brown Bibles there, if you want to grab one of those. As you guys are opening up, I want to read this next part directly from the text. But I want to give you a little background of the Jewish law about stealing. There were 3 levels of stealing and 3 penalties that kind of corresponded to each of these. The first is laid out in Leviticus 6, and it says, if you steal something and you realize you're guilty and you go and pay it back plus 1/5. So you steal $1 from your neighbor, you go back and you just pay him $1.20. At that rate, it's kind of like using your neighbor as your own personal credit card. The second level is talked about in Exodus 22, and it says if you steal something but you get caught in the act, it's a different penalty. So your neighbor gets a new 60-inch flat screen TV, and you realize you need that. Because when you watch football, you want to be in the game. So you go and you steal his TV, and he realizes his is missing and sees a suspicious glow coming from your living room. So he goes over and catches you in the act. Now you don't pay back 120%. You have to pay back 2 times. So now you need to get him a 120-inch flat screen TV, which I don't even think they make. So good luck with that. The third and the worst level is if you take something and you consume it. So, your neighbor's grilling up some burgers and lamb chops, and it smells great, and he goes into the house, and you sneak over, you steal a burger and a lamb chop, you go home and you eat it. Now that you've stolen it and you've consumed it, it says in Exodus 22 that you need to pay back 5 times for the beef and 4 times for the lamb. I don't know why they're different, but they are. So now you have to pay back 5 burgers, 4 lamb chops for what you stole. This is the worst form of stealing. If you steal and you just use it and you consume it unapologetically and then you get caught, you have to pay back 4 or 5 times. And so now we're in this story with Zacchaeus. And we're in verse 8, Jesus comes over to his house, and the next thing we see is, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything," he says, "I will pay back 4 times the amount." Zacchaeus was an Israelite. He was a Hebrew. He knew the law. What Zacchaeus is doing in this moment is he's realizing, I didn't steal anything. It was fair and square. It was legal. The government allowed me to do it. But I'm not innocent. And he identifies himself with the worst kind of thief in that moment. He says, I'm not innocent. I'm the worst kind of thief because I have the heart of a thief inside of me. We looked over the past couple of weeks. The heart of a murderer is anger, and the heart of an adulterer is lust, and the heart of a thief is selfishness. This is the mindset. Stealing is just like the worst outcome of selfishness, where you're actually just going to take from somebody else for your own well-being. It's this idea of disregarding the well-being of others for your own self-interest. Maybe you haven't stolen anything, but is this mindset of selfishness alive in you? I mean, when you go to work, do you have a tendency to kind of slack off? Do you have a tendency to spend more time on Facebook or Pinterest than doing the job that you're hired to do, in that moment, you're stealing time from your employer. Or maybe when you're doing your taxes, you kind of fudge a little number here and there. It's not a big deal, but in that moment, you're serving yourself, your own best interest, disregarding how it's going to affect society or others. Maybe it's, your relationship with your spouse. Maybe you're so consumed by work or by your hobbies. Maybe you're just thinking about, the things that are going to make you happy, and you're doing those things rather than spending time with your family. In that moment, you're actually stealing love and affection and time from the people that you've promised these things to. Maybe it's in the work that you do. Maybe your job actually at its core says, you know what, we're going to make a buck no matter what it costs the other person. And maybe it is rooted in a selfishness, and it might be completely legal. It might even be normal. It might be just kind of part of the capitalist way of life, but is it good? Or maybe on the other side of the spectrum, maybe you're not working at all. Maybe you haven't worked in a while and, you just don't feel like it, and you manage to find a good system where you can kind of mooch off your family or mooch off the government. And in that moment, there's a disregard for the people that it affects, for our own self-interest. I think all of us, myself included, if we press this deep, we can find the areas in our lives where the heart of a thief is being made manifest. And even as I've been doing this over this past week and thinking about it, I found a few areas in my own life that I've needed to address. And it can feel kind of condemning as we think about it. But there's hope. There's hope. And we see this in the story of Zacchaeus. Because Zacchaeus, he had this heart of a thief, but he managed to overcome it. And as he stands up and he says this, right after, in verse 9, Jesus says to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house." He's not talking about salvation in like the theological sense, like eternal salvation, as we would talk about it in Christian circles or whatever. He's talking about freedom, deliverance. He's been set free from this mindset of selfishness, which is just so normal. Jesus says, look, freedom has come to this man. And the text is a little frustrating at this point. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that the Bible is frustrating, but this happens in like TV and movies sometimes, where it seems to skip over an important scene somewhere. Like you see Jesus and he meets Zacchaeus and he invites himself over, he goes over, yada, yada, yada. Zacchaeus has this dramatic transformation. It's like, wait a minute, you just yada, yada, yada over the most important part. Like what did Jesus say to him? What did Jesus do that all of a sudden, created this transformation in Zacchaeus? And I think Luke, the author of this gospel, I think he was intentional in leaving that out. Because I don't think it was about something Jesus did or some miraculous words Jesus said to Zacchaeus that created this transformation. I think it was the fact that Jesus was staying with Zacchaeus. If you go back to verse 1 of this passage, it says, Jesus entered Jericho and he was just passing through. But then when he comes to Zacchaeus, he says to Zacchaeus, come down immediately. And he says, I must stay at your house. And the word he uses for stay here, the Greek word is meno. And this is the same word that Jesus uses later to tell his disciples. He's saying, I'm the vine, you're the branches. And he says, if you stay, if you remain, meno, if you abide in me, then I will meno, I will abide, stay, remain with you. I think we have to ask ourselves this question, is Jesus somebody who's just passing through in our lives? Is he somebody who just kind of passes through on Sundays or passes through when we need him or passes through when we happen to think about him? Or is Jesus somebody who remains, who stays with us, who takes up residency in our heart? Because when Jesus stays with Zacchaeus, we see that Zacchaeus, he's transformed. His mindset is taken from that of a thief to that of Jesus himself. The mindset of Christ is implanted in him. Paul talks about this mindset in Philippians 2. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of us to the interests of others. Basically, he's saying, don't be selfish, be selfless. I love that sound. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset of Jesus Christ, who, he says, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing. Here is Jesus himself. He has divinity in his hands, and he's saying, I'm not going to use this for my own advantage. I'm not going to use this for my own self-interest. I'm going to give it up. I'm going to make myself nothing. And he did it for you, and you, and you, and you, and me. This is the mindset of Jesus, and this is what starts to take root in Zacchaeus as he allows Jesus to stay with him. Is Jesus just passing through, or is he remaining in your hearts? And there's a few practical things that we see Zacchaeus do to help encourage this in his own spiritual journey. Three things. First, he identifies, he rectifies, and he multiplies. Identify, rectify, multiply. So the first thing he does is he identifies the guilt. All this time, Zacchaeus, he just thinks he's innocent. People might not trust him, but he assumes what he's doing is okay, and he's kind of working on that premise. But then he comes to terms with the fact that, I have the heart of a thief. And this can be difficult to do because selfishness is not something we learn. Selfishness is not something we kind of acquire over the years. Selfishness is like bred into us. Anybody who has young children or has been around young children knows this, because kids, they come out of the womb like stealing toys from each other. I think it's Tim Keller who says that a baby would kill you for a meal if it could or had to, because we're just wired to look out for ourselves and our own self-interest. And this, because it's so ingrained in us, it can be really difficult to try and pinpoint it in our lives. We have to be kind of looking for it. And we can actually take a couple of things from Zacchaeus here to help reveal these things to us. For instance, if everybody hates you, question that. If there's a reason why everybody is like upset with you and disappointed with you, you may want to say, well, is there selfish behavior behind this? It's not always the case. I mean, people hated Jesus too. But that's the exception. For the most part, if people hate you, there's a good chance that there's selfishness behind that. Try to figure out what that is. Or maybe they don't hate you because they don't actually know what's going on, because you hide it. Like if you've perfected the art of minimizing your Facebook page every time your boss walks around the corner so that as he doesn't see it. Well, you also might want to consider those situations as well. Are there things that you're hiding from people because you think if they actually knew, they would be upset? Question, is there selfishness that's at the root of that? And then if you've ever said any of these four things to yourself, it's not that big of a deal. I don't think it's hurting anybody. They probably wouldn't care, or they deserve it. These are questions that if you're making these statements to yourself, question it. Just pause for a second, ask, is this good? Or is this the selfishness inside of me kind of coming to the surface? The first thing Zacchaeus does is he identifies the guilt, and then he rectifies the situation. He doesn't just go and say, I'm going to stop being a malicious tax collector. He actually, he goes and he owns up to what he's done, and he tries to make the situation right again. And this is hard. This is really, really hard, because it might mean for you that you need to go to your boss or your spouse or your kids or a friend or a family member or something and actually say to them, I'm sorry, I've been wronging you all this time. You might not have known it, but I have, or maybe they do know it, and to own up to that. But not just to own up to it, but he actually tries to make it right again. He goes above and beyond. He says, I'm going to give back 4 times what I stole or cheated these people out of, because I want to make the situation right. I want to rectify this. And so try and figure out, ask them, say, hey, how can I make this right again? I'm sorry. It's a hard thing to do, and this is why I think it's so important that it begins with this idea of Jesus taking root in our lives. Because this isn't normal human behavior, and I don't think this is something we can do on our own. We need his strength inside of us, kind of encouraging us along. But as we win these little battles, just one by one, crushing the selfishness in our lives, it creates room for the mindset of Jesus to take root in our lives. He identifies, he rectifies, and then he multiplies. He says, I'm going to give half of what I own to the poor. Half of what I own. This is in addition to giving back, what he might have cheated people out of. Half of what I own. There's nothing more powerful at maintaining a selfless disposition than giving to other people. Giving your time, your money, your resources. Actually taking time away from thinking about me and what I need and how I'm going to better myself, and actually think about other people. Think about, how can I make life better for this person or this person? And as we do these things, as we identify and we rectify and we multiply, all of a sudden we can begin to see the mindset of Jesus Christ taking form in our own lives. And it's not some theoretical idea that's out there. It's kind of indwelling us. It becomes our mindset. We think this way. We think, how can I be of service to somebody else? And as we do this as a community of faith, it becomes really, really powerful. If you just kind of imagine for a second. I just got married about a month ago. Yay, for me. It's been awesome. Really enjoying married life. But I think one of the coolest things about it is that when I'm with Lindsay, I don't actually have to worry about taking care of myself, because she actually does a better job of taking care of me than I ever could, which is great. I had coffee this morning and breakfast. I never eat breakfast in the morning, and she made me breakfast. This is amazing. But the thing that's so awesome about it is because I don't have to take care of myself, it frees me up that I can take care of her. And we can kind of invest in each other in this way. And we don't have to, worry about our own interests not being taken care of, because we have each other. And as we do this, just imagine, as we do this as a community of faith, multiplying that out. Imagine if Mike doesn't need to worry about Mike and Mike's interests, because Mike has 300 other people that are worrying about Mike. Imagine if, Nathaniel doesn't have to think, oh man, I just need to make sure Nathaniel gets through this day and takes care of his needs and everything. He doesn't need to worry about Nathaniel, because he has 300 other people saying, no, we got your back. Giving you the strength to make these hard decisions and to live for the benefit of other people. A whole community that's kind of defined by this mindset of Christ, it would be earth-shattering. The world says this isn't possible. You can't not look out for yourself because nobody else is going to look out for you, because at our hearts we're selfish, right? But what if we weren't? What if we weren't? What if we weren't selfish to the core? What if the mindset of Christ did develop inside of us and we became a community that was defined by that? Imagine what we could do. Let's pray. God, we are so humbled by your sacrifice, by the fact that you have everything at your fingertips, and you laid it aside for our sake. It's just an amazing concept that we can't even really wrap our minds around, God. But as we allow you to dwell inside of us, and as your spirit fills us and changes us, God, we pray that the mindset of Jesus Christ becomes real for us. That we find freedom, deliverance from this mentality of me, and taking care of me. And we are freed to actually live for the benefit of other people, God. Knowing that you have our back, and we have this community of faith looking out for us. And God, we thank you so much for all these things. We love you and we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen.